Welcome to another edition of Cattle Chatter. I'm Susan Littlefield. We survived the craziest of last week, but how much influence is it having on this week's trade? And we know the borders have opened, heavy weights are being factored in. So we've got a lot to break up on the fact that it's a shortened holiday week as well because of the 4th of July on Friday. Joining us, as always, is the one and only Brad Kooima. He is with Kooima Kooima Varilek out of Sioux Center, Iowa. So last week we were talking about this struggle bus within the cattle market. Reflect a little bit on that and how it may have influenced the beginning of this week's trade.
Fair enough. Thanks for having me on, Susan, again, of course. Happy 4th of July to everyone. And for those that provide the freedom that we can celebrate. We're going to have to come up with something for Tuesday. I don't know, Terrible Tuesday or something. It seems like we've had several Tuesdays here lately where, as you asked me to reflect on back here, I think you got a couple of things. The macro thing here, of course, is that we've got, we broke the uptrend we changed from trending higher every week consistently on the cash, where we'd have early week weakness in the futures, and by the end of the week the cash would say nope, we're going to be higher again because we still don't have enough cattle, and then you'd see the futures market typically rally pretty hard and going into the weekend, and now we broke that pattern. We've had lower cash now for about 4 weeks, and there's I got a little post-it note stuck up here that I think any commodity trader can relate to. Up on the stairs, down on the elevator. In other words, typically we go up slowly and go down quickly. So you wonder, as quickly as we went up on cash, I mean, we had several weeks where we were 3 to 5 higher a week. So I don't know, I mean, the market's got different dynamics than sometimes steeply discounted futures. The futures are building in a pretty big break in the cash market. Okay. So, do I think cash market can, I think they're probably going to get a little lower. Early indications are, again, that it'll be a little softer this week. And I think some of that's because, Susan, you got to, like in the north, guys we feed yearlings or calves, right? I mean, typically a spring-born calf, that's probably 25% or more of the total herd. So a lot of guys don't feed yearlings. They take care of, they utilize their roughage, their silage, their ability to care for cattle, their husbandry, right? I mean, taking care of calves. And they haven't got in on this high price yet. And frankly, these cattle make quite a bit of money up here. So we've seen a very willing seller here in terms of the cash market. So, and I don't really see that changing. And that hasn't been my recommendation either. I mean, let's stay very current. That's what's really helped us stay this good so far. So, then as we wrapped up, we had a cattle on feed report that nobody cared about. I didn't either, because, the placement number was a little better than expected. Tell us something we didn't know. It's because Texas has their 7th straight month of record small placements. Okay. So the placements are even a little bit less than the expectations. And we could probably develop that Texas story a little bit because it's obviously what the reason is for that, right? It's the border closing.
So let's talk about that because now they're going to start opening the border starting early next week and continuing on to hit all 5 spots. Is there the concerns about the cattle that are sitting on the other side of that border getting too heavy?
Well, how can there not be a concern of? So I mean, and I'm not gonna hook my covered wagon to this one news event, but I mean, last year, the last few years, we've been averaging a little over 1.1 million cattle imported out of Mexico, largely into Texas to a degree, into some of the other states like Kansas and Arizona. And so when you shut off that kind of a supply, 1.1 million cattle, so just doing some rough math, and this is my own math, we've probably backed up 600,000 or 700,000 cattle that would have already gotten placed. Now, these cattle are not like going to Fort Pierce, South Dakota, and buying a 900-pound steer, right? These are typically very flyweight, what I would call light calves, 400-pound, 500-pound calves maybe. And I'm very curious. I would love to have some boots in the ground. And if you got somebody that's got that, I would love to hear it. I'm curious. So when they start Monday with the airs, there's 5 entry points, and they're going to start with the one that's the farthest away, where they think the less risk of the screwworm being imported in Arizona, and then every week they're going to open another one and gradually get closer and closer to the one that's the closest to the Mexican border. I'm curious what they weigh. You'd almost would think that you'd see a lot of 700 to 800 pound cattle now instead of the 4 and 5 weight cattle. And then, of course, the feeder in me does the math. Okay, well, when are they going to be fat? Because there's going to be a few more cattle now there than we thought, right? I mean, it is what it is. And I think there was a time when we thought, Susan, that well, they'll open this border soon. Surely they'll get this then. And then we started to hear, oh no, they're pretty cranked up about this screw worm thing and may not open all year. I was hearing that for a while. So this does change the dynamics a little bit. To me, I'm relieved to see the market stabilize and we're actually trading a little higher as we visit. It's most negative to the feeder cattle, I would guess, right, initially. And then we got to keep an eye on maybe fourth quarter live cattle to see if there's an influence. But it's really too early for me to say. We haven't even seen the first steer come across yet. And I'm curious what they weigh and even the pace of it. I would think it'd be slower because of all the protocol that they'd have to do. So that might temper the reaction to the market too.
Well, anybody that knows you, Brad, knows you're kind of a numbers nerd, which is always exciting for us. And you had kind of indicated talking about cattle weights, since we're talking weights, looking at those cattle weights in Iowa and doing some comparisons that might have people a little surprised.
Well, yeah, thank you for that good softball question for a guy that's not very handy, right? Yeah, I'm kind of a nerd with numbers. And I'm going to reference here a little bit. I know I've said this on your program a number of times, but a good friend and mentor of mine said one time the beginning and the end of all markets start in Iowa. And, I'm sure your Kansas folks will not like that statement. But I think the statement rings true of the North. And by the North, I have a tendency to think of anything north of Interstate 80. And most of that's because we do a different job of marketing cattle here. We largely negotiate our cattle, and we don't have all the relationship cattle, formula cattle. So yeah, but your question. So Tuesdays the regional weights come out, and Iowa's steer carcass weights are now, 14 pounds below a year ago. So Iowa continues to be extremely current, as we have been for a long, long, long time. And people say, well, what about the weights? How come the weights are so big, Brad? I'm like, it's not Iowa. And it's largely not Nebraska. It's the South that the weights are much, much bigger. And you can see that when they do the regional breakdown. You get a weight for Texas, Kansas, Nebraska, Iowa, etc. Okay, so 14 pounds under a year ago now for Iowa, year on year. But the real interesting thing to me, and I don't remember ever seeing anything remotely close to this, is that Iowa's steer carcass weights are 45 pounds below Kansas. 45 pounds steer carcass. And people have been asked, we've been thinking, well, why is that? Different feeding practices. How about different type and kind of cattle? Typically, we'd feed the kind of cattle up here that would naturally get bigger. Typically, you'd have a farmer feeder up here that always made them bigger. I would say it's because you got an influence here by the packer that you got empty pens all over down there. I just we talked about the lack of the light placements. And so I think that they've decided to choose to make them bigger. That's the way we're going to keep getting pounds. And so we're going to, that's the choice to make them bigger. So I think it's interesting. I'm certainly going to keep an eye on it. I certainly like the fact that Iowa is current because I think that'll help the market generally, cushion to whatever low we do make here. But hey, it's the 2nd of July. I mean, it's a rare year where you rally very good in July. I mean, it's a hamburger hot dog feature and we'll sit like this for a little bit. Even in 2014, by the way, which I always called up until this one, the bull market of my career. We broke pretty good the first 2 weeks of July and then finished real strong the last part of July. I wonder if we couldn't do something like that again. I guess that's kind of what I'm thinking. So,
Hey, I love your optimism. What are you thinking about July and August cattle supplies at this point?
Well, they're more than there are in June. I don't think that anybody, I mean, looking at placement patterns, looking at the pattern of placing calves, certainly I think that that's the case in the north at least. Not burdensomely, no, but more than today. Okay, and then the kicker is are we going to stay this current going into that deal? And then I think one of the things that analytics on cattle are interesting because there's so many components, and it seems like sometimes we trade some of them and not all. You know what I mean? But I'm old enough to know that it's kind of unusual that we've had such mild weather. I mean, going all the way back through the winter, and cheap feed, that we haven't gotten in trouble with the weights, and we haven't, as I just explained. But I mean, that's something that the practical part of my brain is going like, well, we better make sure, So, and I think that's largely because we're so far above our break evens that we love the profit that we're making. So, as we get into some cattle that maybe break even more like in the 210 to 215 range, which maybe is out there another 60 days or so, then I'm curious to see are we going to be able to stay that current or not through that time period. So, we got a supply of cattle that's tight, and they can't change that in the near term. So, but it's always the black swan, right? It's always the weird thing that we can't anticipate. The 90-day hold is up on July 9. We'll be talking about that next week, I'm sure. Whether everything's safe to go back in the water or not. So there's still some stuff out there, and I'm still short-term very cautious.
All right, Brad. What's the best way for folks to get a hold of you?
Well, you can look at us at kkbtrading.com, but we'd rather have you call 712-722-0023.
All right, everybody have a very safe and wonderful 4th of July, and nothing against those hot dogs. Push them off the side of the grill and do some steaks as you head into the holiday weekend. And that, another edition of Cattle Chatter.
The views and opinions of this program are those of the hosts, guests, and callers. There is substantial risk of loss in trading futures and options, which you should carefully consider prior to trading.